Staatsregierung auf den Gebieten des wirtschaftlichen Lebens. Hier wird ein Gesetz alles Handeln bestimmen. Das Volk lebt nicht für die Wirtschaft und die Wirtschaft existiert nicht für das Kapital, sondern das Kapital dient der Welt und die Wirtschaft dem Volk.
Fascism is not anything.
Unter Bruch der uns in den 14 Punkten Bildungs gemachten Zusicherungen.
There's no definition for it, especially not for the fascists themselves. Fascism is non-reality, and its lack of reality is precisely what defines it and why it's so dangerous. Fascism is an ideological construct by the ruling class, and once we identify that, we can then begin the work of dismantling it. In other words, once we recognize how invisible it really is, then we'll have no mere people to direct our maddening anger at, but rather the system itself. Fascism is fiction made into reality. The radical act, then, must be to reveal that reality itself was and always has been fiction. And of course, it should be quite obvious by now what I'm trying to do, because these exact same words are much better suited to describe capitalism. For both is ideology subjugation made absolute. Therefore, fascism can be best described as primitive capitalism. Or, for a less extreme statement, fascism mainly uses brute force for domination, which is like a Neanderthal version of what capitalism does. First, let's take a cold materialist political analysis. Keep in mind, this is just a precursor to my actual analysis. This is not what I'm interested in exploring, though of course history is very important. We can make a lot of concrete connections between fascism and capitalism. There's quite literally a Wikipedia page of a list of corporations that profited from the Nazi regime. All it takes is a single Google search. Colonialism is what inspired the fascists. It's literally what the fascists did, though a more evolved version, modified for 20th century politics. Let's also not forget the rampant state or corporate violence, same thing at the time, during the Gilded Age. Factories at times resembled sort of fascism in a way of conformity. Nazis literally coined the term of privatization. They did everything to support businesses and weaken workers. Nazis and neoliberals both demonize leftists and make the world black and white, labeling what's quote-unquote degenerate and what's causing the downfall of so-called civilized society.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
And the most damning of all, America supported numerous fascist regimes to counter scary communists during the Cold War. In fact, to this day, fascism is relatively ignored compared to how demonized communism still is. Because apparently the bigger threat is the communists who want to give you food and housing, not the fascists who want to either kill you or force you to join their ranks. But hey, at least they're upholding the concept of private capital, am I right?
Socialism is when the government does stuff. And it's more socialism the more stuff it does. And if it does a real lot of stuff, it's communism.
Many Nazi officials after the World War also kept their positions. And in contrast to all of this, how does the right connect fascism and socialism? Because they have the same name, that's it. Well, other than exaggerations and myths about the Soviet Union and the fact that the USSR had to play the game of politics like every other nation. Yeah, as if Western powers weren't also doing appeasement at the time. This is all the evidence the right has, while the left draws on centuries of history that continues to this day. Fascism can be seen as the ruling class bickering over who gets to rule. A new ruling class of fascists emerged and threatened the so-called peace of the violent status quo of the capitalist ruling class. Second, let's see the underlying forces for all these occurrences in politics.
There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, but this war is for the soul of America.
Let's take American conservatism. It's usually not fascist, I know, but it's a good example. The American conservative doesn't actually want to conserve anything real. They want to conserve their idea of the past, their idea of the world. They want to feel marginalized, silent masses, but they also don't, and in reality, they're not. They want to connect with others, but only on the surface level, through shallow politics and sensationalism. They want truth, but only in the form of lies, of simplifications that place them in the center. The conservative needs something concrete they can rely on, but to everyone else, that concrete is as fluid and changing as anything. They want to keep the status quo, but by upending it, so they can affirm it even harder. The radicals are being too radical, they say. So we need to radically reinstate the status quo. That is what America always supposedly was. The conservative wants their fiction to be real, and it is real. It is all too real. It is all around us. Politics does not hide reality, it's part of reality itself. It shapes reality as it lies about reality. It is interesting then, when a conservative completely acknowledges and embraces fiction as opposed to reality, embraces what they can't control, fiction, as opposed to what they can control, reality, when they don't incorporate their fiction into reality, because in the end, all they want is the fiction. Such is the comedian Big Joe talks about at the end of his video essay, "Conservative Comedy Destroyed My Life." Stuff like QAnon is usually not mentioned much in conservatism, but it's what conservatives really are. When the conservative is fully honest with themselves, you can see that what they want to believe is the truth. They don't need justification, they are unapologetically conservative. They don't need to point to tradition and ethics, such as traditional masculinity and precarious Judeo-Christian values. When the conservative is fully honest with themselves, it reveals the ultimate uselessness of fighting conservatives, of cynical analyses of how people get into conservatism, e.g., it's because they're dumb or evil, it's because of populist politics, it's because of deteriorating material conditions and scapegoating by the people in power. It's because of human nature or trauma, and so on and so on. The truth, however, is that they simply just want to. Ideology does not exist. Thus, what's interesting about conservatives, and why I like them far more than liberal dumbasses, is that it reveals exactly that. There is no truth, no ethics, no ideology. Merely what people want to do and say. Conservatism thus doesn't hide behind anything, it is pure ideology. It is the beautiful authenticity of an inhuman system. You could say the inhuman system is being human. Let's go through our list of contradictions again, but with the conservative being fully honest with themselves. They want to create their ideal utopia. They want to be the most dominant group. They want surface level simplicity. They want to create the concrete ground of ideas that everyone else must presuppose. They want to be a radical. They want a fiction.
And there's something horrifying about that feeling that there is no truth, that people will just contort reality any way they like. But at the same time, it's kind of fun. Like, this person is doing this imaginative, crazy, irrational reading, and they're presenting it as though it just makes sense, because that's the story that they have to tell themselves to watch J.P. Sears, I guess. People will do anything for the media that makes them feel comfortable.
I effectively believe the judge's words, not my eyes. i.e., I believe in another space, the domain of pure symbolic authority, which matters more than the reality of its spokesman. The cynical reduction to reality thus falls short. When a judge speaks, there is in a way more truth in his words, the words of the institution of law, than in the direct reality of the person of judgment. If one limits oneself to what one sees, one simply misses the point. Those who do not allow themselves to be caught in the symbolic deception/fiction, who continue to believe their eyes are the ones who err most. A cynic who quote-unquote believes only his eyes misses the efficiency of the symbolic fiction and how it structures our experience of reality. Žižek, 1997. Ideology is non-reality, and its lack of reality is precisely what defines it. Law, which speaks through the judge, doesn't exist, but it still structures our experience of reality. That is, even if law doesn't exist, it is more real than what we immediately see in front of our eyes. Conservatism is the absurdity of reality. Fascism, however, is reality. Under fascism, neither absurdity nor normality can effectively exist. But in order to do that, fascism needs to go through conservatism, which emphasizes the absurdity of reality to an all-consuming extent. In this way, fascism utilizes the fundamental law that everything is functionally nothing. Once it becomes everything, there is nothing else. Ideology reproduces itself and fascism swallows its victims whole, leaving them intact so that they may still think. Think, that is, only for fascism. Subjugation is made absolute in this manner. For the fascists and for fascism itself, the very concept of fascism does not actually exist in reality. It is the myth of the nation, it is politics as mere surface level aesthetics and not real change. It is the past that was constructed as mere fiction. It is Lacan's and Žižek's symbolic order of things taken to the absolute extreme. But no matter how extreme it is, it still remains inexistent. And yet, it still swallows its victims whole, its invisible body, incorporating them into the fiction of power of the symbolic structure of things. The fiction that is real only for the people being slaughtered in the concentration camps and on the front lines. And even then, it is invisible. Masking itself in physical objects and persons, ideology still pervades over all. Fascism is the absolutism of contemporary reality. Modern capitalism, in contrast, i.e. neoliberalism, does not swallow its victims. Its victims have already been consumed by the fiction of money and capital. Capitalism does not use myths and fictionalizations, actually. The real and physical influence of money is not fiction, but an all-consuming reality. In other words, it forced its fiction into becoming the new reality. Subjugation is absolute, and yet we all know that. And yet we do not care as we go about our everyday lives. Politics is mere aesthetics. Every president will always bomb some third world country, and yet we squabble and vote anyway. Power is not ours to have, just like in fascism, but we either cannot see that or we can see that, and like the fascists, do not care. Because to us that fact might as well not exist. The victims of capitalism can still think, but only for the constant expansion and reproduction of capitalism's functions, whether it be at work or leisure time where you serve the social media algorithm, or school where you do assignments so you can get an arbitrary number GPA from the higher ups, or in prison doing unpaid labor, and so on and so on. Quote, "The symbolic order is precisely such a formal order which supplements and or disrupts the dual relationship of external factual reality and internal subjective experience. Žižek, 1989. Žižek says this in context of comparing it to the unconscious. That is, thought is formed in the unconscious before the conscious act of thinking itself. In comparison to this, we assume the many premises of capitalism before going about our everyday lives. Capitalism is therefore a far more involved system than fascism, which merely uses brute force to get its way, instead of more invisible forms of control. Let me provide an analogy. The difference between a storm, fascism, and calm water, capitalism, is that one recognizes all you need to drown someone is water. The bliss of the calm water is its ruthless efficiency at drowning people. All excess elements are removed in order to drown you like clockwork, instead of make a scene out of it. The murderer does not kill with a cry of despair, but with simple silence. Under fascism, all is unified under ideology. Under capitalism, all is atomized under ideology. Both are filled with lonely, powerless crowds of people, if you can call them that. Hunters, cavemen as you call it, were spiritually connected with their prey, and what a simple life they led. All the morality they had to deal with is merely the physical act of killing an animal for food. Now we are in the post-physical world where the mechanisms of society are far more real than anything in any individual's life. Tragedy was as simple as death and life, life and death. But now, through the process of enlightenment, all is subjugated, every person, every mental state, every future, all consumed from the inside out in ruthless efficiency. The artist is all that remains of metaphysical living. The structuralists presented their thesis decades ago, and yet okay, so yeah, that's basically the end of the video, but I know what this stupid liberal is probably saying at this point, like, well, what about the socialist states? Well, perhaps they could have evolved into sophisticated forms of domination, but that's pure speculation. And I personally don't see socialist states developing any form of sophisticated domination if they stick to socialism. Rather, because capitalism won over state socialism has remained in its infancy. A mode of domination, sure, but a relatively weak one, that provides its citizens with far more wealth, both in terms of political and economic power than capitalist nations ever can, and ever have, in fact. For example, most Westerners probably think economic planning had no input from the local businesses, but that's obviously stupid and impractical. The USSR also held order elections, and sure, you can say it was still more or less bureaucratic, but at least it did have a way for people to voice their concerns. The USSR also supported numerous independence movements of the Third World, an issue we can all agree on, I think. It especially advanced women's rights and science. Sure, it was a perfect country and recognized the anarchist critiques and its many failures, especially in terms of religious freedom. Its imperialism at times, I don't know. All other criticisms are either highly exaggerated or completely manipulated to the point of blurring the actual problems of the country. Main point: critique of how ideology functions under capitalism and fascism doesn't really apply too well to socialist states, at least from my perspective. So, Yeah, okay. So this was basically my way of understanding Žižek, and if I'm being honest, I can barely even understand his movies, and those are a billion times simpler than his writing. There's constant references to all kinds of philosophy, and every other word is a philosophical term, so I guess this is kind of a sneak peek into my future project.
1 hour stop for lunch. Take that. You take that.
Listen, Mammy, there ain't no way to wash clothes. What you all need is rhythm.
What do you all mean, rhythm?
I'll show you what I mean. In Harlem, there's a little place where everyone goes to see the way a washerwoman washes her clothes.
If you like boogie woogie rhythm, she's gotta be. Let the boogie woogie washerwoman give you a treat. On every afternoon at when the sessions begin, and all the boys from all the bands come down and sit in. They sit around and knock each other out when they play.